I could give you the mission statement in whole, but in all honesty, the core of what the mission of Mando is building relationships. Um, it's building relationships with the youth that we serve, and using our lived experience to build those connections, and honestly, like really, set that foundation to where we can break a barrier of youth who aren't accustomed to asking for help or recognizing that they need help, and knowing where they are and being able to meet them there, and essentially get them from that point to a better place in their life with a bigger perspective, a larger perspective. That honestly, the world is a lot bigger than where they are at the time, at the moment. Our organization is one that's built off relationships, and the programming that we provide is, honestly, just from my standpoint and personal experience, is, if there's things that I haven't been through, it's trying to pinpoint and figure out how many things we can provide. If there's not one size that fits all, then what are the different sizes that fit any youth's given circumstance or scenario, or you know whatever personal thing they're going through. How can we help them? How can we meet them where they are, and honestly get them past that point? If I have 10 different youth that have 10 different reasons, then I have to find 10 different ways to figure out how to help each one of them. And it's not as easy as it seems, but it's a task that in the organization, and as a person, as a mentor, as a father, as a community member, I have to go out there and try to figure these things out. And so I really try to embody that, not just for myself, but everybody that's on the team at MANDO Youth Development Group, and try to help all these youth get past that pivotal moment in their life. That's what our mission is. Everything that I've been through, uh, from a young age, having experienced, everything from, feeling like an outcast in my own household, and like a black sheep, um, to the traumas of, honestly, not even understanding that it was trauma at the time, just living day to day, watching my brother go through those things, joining a gang, being shot, being stabbed, and taking all those things and not knowing how to cope with my own emotions, getting incarcerated for years at a time, living in a chaotic environment, and seeing the violence of that at such a young age. And then ultimately going on to the next phase of my life, which was being released, becoming a father, um, working hard to become a better man. All those experiences led me to where I am now. And if I can't reflect on all those things, or couldn't have reflected on all those things to take away, then it was all for nothing. What was the experience of going through the pains, the joys, the suffering for, if I can't use that to try to teach youth how to become better? How to see that they can turn pain into purpose, that they can take whatever it is they feel they can't get past right now, and they can get past it, and they can actually turn that into a strength. Just the same way that I have. It's the same beginning. They get to choose what their end is, though, or what their journey looks like on an everyday basis. And so I'm using my personal lived experience to be able to show them that, so they can have that hope, and understand that they do have a higher purpose for their lives and more value. Honestly, it's when you're working with youth, there's, you look at a teenager and you think that, getting a teen to do his homework is easy. It's not. So try getting a youth to express their emotions and be vulnerable, and then getting their parents on the same page to continue to strengthen a support system, or you know, a support group around them. The challenges are bringing everybody together to be on the same page, whether it's us with the youth, us with families in home, because we can do half the work, but if the other half of the work isn't being done at home, that is a challenge, because the environment needs to be recreated to be a positive one, so that the youth can thrive. They can feel like they have all the support in an educational setting, in a group setting, like they are with us, and in home, which is the most important aspect of what we do. And when you take one youth who is struggling, and you multiply that by however many youth are throughout the county, you have a lot of different problems that we need to tackle. And to be able to provide programs for not just youth but for parents alike, there's a great demand. And there's a need for a capacity to be able to meet that demand. And so the challenge is, ultimately, not just working with youth, but also incorporating the families into being able to help, create that positive support system for them. I'll use the example of, I won't say a name, but Youth J as one of the primary examples of a youth that, you know, when we get into working with a youth that you see has all the self-esteem and the low confidence, as a child, and you you try to reach them at that young age and you don't, but then you're able to do the intervention and meet a youth where he's at. Youth J is a perfect example of a youth that takes everything that he's been mentored and guided in. The path's not easy. It's still difficult. There's still bumps in the road. But he demonstrates that there is a want to be better. And, I'll share a quick story of, me having a van full of youth, and he stands out as one of our leaders in the organization, in the programs. He stands above all, and he lets it be known, like, hey, what's right is right and what's wrong is wrong. And I shared with the youth a story about a 5-year-old who, goes to school and has problems, shows up to school with dirty clothes on, doesn't show up to school for weeks at a time. And I asked the youth in the van that I was driving at the time. I was transporting them from, all their homes to program. And I asked, how many of you would like to go to the store with me to buy, toys or clothes for this 5-year-old that isn't a part of our program, but it's just we caught wind of it and we know that he's in a hard place. Why not give him that positive reinforcement? Even for them, they don't have to wait 20 years to be 35 to reach my age to see that they can make an impact. They recognize it now, and every single one of them raise their hands to say, I want to do that. I want to make the difference in that child's life, so that he doesn't ever get to a point where he's struggling like we did, or he's struggling like you did as a mentor to us. That shows that everything they're being taught, or they're being mentored in, or they're seeing through the programming, they're taking it and they're recognizing the humanity, they're recognizing the humility, they're wanting to make a greater impact, and a positive impact at that, because it takes all of us. It's not just us as adults, it's also them. And for them to step up and want to be those leaders in the community and show that they can do more, that demonstrates that the impact that's being created, because it's not just me anymore. It's a domino effect per se, and it's having a really positive impact. The vision that I have for Mando is, the vision, we'd probably be here for hours or days at a time if I really dove into it. Um, but it's to expand. It's to expand to meet the demand, honestly, for for every kid that needs something different. You know, it's to expand not only just facility wise, to have a place for all these youth to be able to come and have the capacity to meet a larger capacity of youth throughout the county, which we serve right now, but it's to, honestly recreate myself, but better leaders in the communities amongst the youth. It's to show them, develop them. That's why it's MANDO Youth Development Group. It sounds business like, but it's not business as usual. It's building on those connections and relationships so that, while these youth are coming in, you're going to have youth who, pursue higher education, that pursue different careers, but you're also going to have youth like those youth in the van that they want to stay to make an impact. And it's continuing to develop them in a positive light to stick around because that's where they want to be, and expand on that. And, with that growth in different aspects, from, a place where they can get everything from educational to career planning and placement and just continued development, that's the vision. That's the goal, is to continue to expand, in every positive way that we can, and meet the needs, honestly, of every youth that walks through our doors or gets referred our way. I think that, for me, I was asked if there was a point where I get nervous. And, if I'm being 100% vulnerable, the point where I get nervous is, when I'm directly looking at a youth that I start working with. And, for me, that's a critical thinking moment, because I'm taking what the youth is giving me and I'm recognizing not only is it a pivotal moment at the age we're reaching them at, but there's a small window of opportunity. There's a small window that closes almost as fast as when you meet this kid and you recognize there's a lot of danger. There's a lot at stake if I don't succeed right now. And for most, that nervousness, you'd probably call it anxiety. You'd feel all different types of emotions, and I have to stay composed. And if it's anything that I'm trying to get across and visualizing that small window of opportunity, it's that, put yourself in my shoes and feeling that anxiousness and that nervousness, that if that's one kid or one youth that I'm working with, there's so many more. There's so many more, and that's the pressure that I feel in that moment where I'm seeing that window of opportunity, that I can't reach this kid, that I can't break this barrier, but I have to act fast, and I have to be able to think quick on my feet to be able to figure out, what does he need? What does she need? And move. When if any of us, you don't have to come from a gang affiliated background or anything like that to be able to resonate with this 10-year-old. If you've ever been a child in a classroom that's afraid to raise their hand because of your peers and what they might say, that's this 10-year-old that is in a classroom setting, to where, professionally we call it preventative work. And, I've gone in these last 3 years through all these different stages and emotions. And, ultimately for me, I call it trench work. When I'm in front of these kids and I'm doing the trench work, it's seeing this 10-year-old that I've been asked to come speak to this class. But out of all the kids in that class, he stands out because he's a leader, but he's also insecure. He's a child that doesn't have the positive reinforcement from parents that care about him. if I don't reach this child, then he becomes the next youth that ends up in the system, that ends up going to prison, that ends up becoming the black sheep in the community. And all he really needed was positive reinforcement. He really needed a mentor, a positive role model. And, for us to meet him where he is to try to understand what his needs are. What does he need help with? But more importantly, help him realize that it's okay for him to be able to ask for that. I got asked in another interview one time if I could give my younger version a piece of advice, what would it be? And it's the same thing I give to the kids in the elementary school classes that I go and present to. It's okay to be wrong. When you're wrong, you find out what's right. And a lot of youth in that age group, they don't understand that. They don't understand that because the ripple effect of a peer making fun of him when he's wrong lasts forever. And it'll affect him and his confidence. And we don't and at that age they don't understand that. And so it's being able to work with that 10-year-old and get him to recognize that, it's okay. And also get his peers to recognize, instead of adding to the trauma of him being too afraid to be wrong, let's reinforce that being wrong is okay and trying to understand what is right. And in turn, that also incorporates, what their lives like on the streets, outside of their home, and knowing that wrong is wrong and not allowing negative influences to breach them, right? To manipulate them. And so it's incredibly important for us to reach that 10-year-old and make sure that he never becomes the youth in high school or in the jail system that we have to do the intervention or reentry work with. Yeah, I would go back to the initial question of what the mission is. And, you know, just this morning I was asked, who are you? Who are you as an organization? Like, what is your mission, right? And, I can talk about the programs, but in reality, it's the relationships. And I'm being asked by other agencies, and most importantly, even probation, what are you doing? What are you doing that takes away from what the normal culture is in a gang lifestyle, to where even within the juvenile facility, when these youth see each other, it's automatically a violent confrontation. But when these kids go to your program, there is no confrontation. And ultimately, not only is it the relationship and the connection I have with the youth and my mentors have, but it's the respect. And it's also teaching them the accountability, the integrity, every single one of us doing our part to understand that, hey, the person that you see across from you, we're not so different. We face the same struggles. We have parents who are battling to survive every single day in an economy that keeps getting more difficult to survive in. And when you start teaching them those things, or you start teaching them about the value that they can add to their lives by understanding what a credit score is, right? For us, that's normal, right? Understanding what your credit scores are and what you're going to do with it and so on and so forth. But for them, it's foreign. It's something they have no knowledge about. And so, the difference is it stems from the relationship building. And because of the lived experience, it's also showing them, hey, I was where you are right now, and you can make a change for the better. And you can start to better understand what you're feeling right now is valid, but how you can heal from that. Because they don't know that they can heal or that there is something to recover from. But when you've been through so much and you don't understand your emotions, that's where we come in. The demand, I would say, if you really want to get an understanding of what the demand feels like, ask yourself on any given day as an individual, what How difficult is it for you to comprehend your own emotions, how to deal with them, how to develop or understand coping mechanisms? And if it's a difficult question to answer to yourself, then multiply that by all the youth in Ventura County, the world, honestly, but Ventura County, this population that we serve, and understand how difficult it is for these youth in environments where there is nobody trying to provide a service to them to really understand their own emotions, to really understand, how do I cope with this? The coping mechanisms that they have are all negative. It's alcohol, it's substance abuse, it's finding an adrenaline rush and the gang affiliation and the things that come with that. And so the opportunity, to really try to teach these youth that there is a better way. It is difficult because it's not just one, it's multiple, it's many. And, it's really on us to do that trench work, to break those barriers and get them to understand, something as simple as poetry or journaling, can help you better understand yourself and how to cope with your emotions and how to get through those negative times. So a few of the collaborations that we currently have, from the beginning to where we are now, I mean, one of the biggest contributors in the very beginning was Safe Passages, who works with youth in the Thousand Oaks, Newberry Park area. And then from there, it was expanding on that to, get assistance and receive mentorship and help from the Social Justice Fund. Currently, we collaborate with the Goodwill Services. When we have youth that are looking for, career development, and possible internships, we reach out, we partner with them, and they provide internships through our organization, which we recently started, and then also helping youth get into looking for work, being placed into different job opportunities. We collaborate with the different school districts, so CVUSD, Conejo Valley Unified School District, recently did a presentation for Frontier High School. We partner up with Ventura County Office of Education through Gateway and Providence in the juvenile facility. We have a partnership and very strong relationship with Ventura County Probation Agency. We have an incredible amount of support from Ventura County Sheriff's Department. Trying to get in and do more work with the behavioral health aspect of what we deal with, and to help the youth better understand, like I said before, their emotional awareness. It's a community Kev over at the Real Guppies, and doing something something as simple as going fishing off a pier, right? So we try to make sure that we get in with the people that care to do, honestly, like I've learned from Chris, the hard work. Everything we've tried to take as far as like providing a title for a program is something that resonates with us and the lifestyle we've lived. From Mando and the Youth Authority was, mandatory, right? It was a negative. You'd mandatory have to go do something. And so, from that stemmed catching fades. Catching fades on the streets is catching a fight. But in a barber shop, it's catching a haircut, right? And so the gentleman that gave me my haircut, his name's Danny Boy. He is an entrepreneur. He runs his own barber shop, and he runs our program, which is almost like a barbershop talk with like LeBron James and Jalen Ramsey, where they're actually talking about real life things. But for us, it's providing real life mentorship at the moment. It's therapeutic in a sense, right? You look good, you feel good, you go out there and you give good output, right? We have a graffiti art program that is taught by a friend of my cousin's who's a Marine veteran that uses that to help youth understand that graffiti art is a therapy and it's an art form. You don't need to go do it out on the streets and, do it all illegally for the wrong reasons. There's a way to express yourself, right? Um, I teach poetry myself. It's something that I learned about myself in the youth authority. There was a way for me to escape the reality of where I was. And so now I teach youth to not only write poetry, but also look at it as a way to write down what you've been through and reflect and allow that to allow you to do the healing work. Um, we have Throwing Hands, which is a spin-off of Catch and Phase, where, we empower female youth to go out and learn about, sound bath and meditation, to learn about journaling, to be able to also get, the pampering, right? Getting their hair done, getting their eyebrows done, and all that good stuff, which is a lot of stuff that I'm not familiar with because that's out of my realm of expertise. But we try to provide, as much as we can, even something as simple as being able to go in and do your schoolwork or get help on a project, or, if you're not feeling it and you're feeling, at a like in a funk, you can go in and you can play on the gaming systems, or you can work out. For me, it's showing them that when I go to the gym, it's not just to, get strong or, become the next bodybuilder, but it's a therapy. You can go to the gym that we've set up there, throw on your headphones, and control what you're putting out and what you're receiving from it. And so, those are part of the programmings that we have, and just trying to help the youth, recognize there's something available for them there. Not only in the juvenile facility do we have a leadership program, and that leadership program consists of rivals coming together and putting their differences aside to try to change the dynamic of the institution from one of an institution based to more of like an academy feel. It's putting your differences aside to see the bigger picture. And that also transcends to the outside, to the community, where we have youth coming through our program um, to help develop them as leaders, to look forward to having conversations with not only us, but also mentors that I have, to help them learn how to public speak, to help them learn about their finances, to help them see that there's more of an impact that they can create. And the effects of that are seen in Youth J and the rest of the youth that raise their hands that day, who are participants of that leadership program, and being able to create more of an impact through them and development. So being a dad for me, when I was still in the gang lifestyle, my 13-year-old son, my 13-year-old son is the one that saved me. Sorry, I'm having such a difficult time with this. Um, my 13-year-old son saved me, and my 13-year-old son continues to save me. Because, is it okay if I share? About 2, 3 days ago, my son, my 13-year-old son, was bullied, and he doesn't come from the lifestyle that I come from. He was bullied, he was beat up, and we spent all Tuesday in the hospital. He had a fractured nose and a fractured cheek. And, I seen this video where I'm seeing my son being beat. And the only thing I can keep thinking about is not being there to protect him. and his hands in front of his face trying to cover himself after being beat up. And while we're at the hospital and he sees me struggling the way that I am right now to keep myself composed, he stops and he says, "Dad, I'm okay. My face is going to heal, and I forgive him for what he did." And he showed me at that moment, it's not about my pride or my ego or about the life that I used to live. It's about continuing to show compassion. And it's not about me leading by example, but following his example. And so being a father not only took me out of a lifestyle that was self-destructive, but it continues to mold me into being a better person, a better mentor, a better human. You know, I think that, I think that when you're a youth and you become a black sheep and you feel like that's the title that you have to wear for the rest of your life, that isn't the case. And it's not just people like me that have the experience of having gone through that can help make that impact. But in reality, when you say it takes a village, it really takes all of us to help these youth transcend and become better than what they believe they have to stay as. And that's my call out to everybody to help make a difference and to help continue to create that impact, because it does take all of us, whether you come from that background or not. All of us interlocking arms and moving together to create that impact is how we change our communities.